recent debates in the US about reducing commitments to Europe have introduced new uncertainties, prompting a necessary reassessment of this security model. How resilient is the current deterrence architecture, and to what extent could European allies compensate for a reduced US role? These questions are particularly pressing in light of Russia's war against Ukraine, which has significantly reshaped threat perceptions across the region. Today, we are joined by two distinguished Estonian experts. Taavi Toom is a former journalist and senior diplomat of Estonia. He has served as editor of foreign news at Postimees, held senior diplomatic posts, including ambassador to Denmark and Poland. He has also served as a director of security policy, as well as director of both the EU department and the public diplomacy department at Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Estonia. And Eke Noom, who is director of Estonian School of Diplomacy, where he leads training, international cooperation, and diplomacy and foreign policy education. Eke also served as an advisor to EU integration policies, with the Georgian government in the scope of a large-scale EU assistance project. So I look forward to a focused and insightful discussion. Thank you, and let us begin. I think allow me to start with the question regarding the current developments. But before that, I think current development, everybody knows that US somehow signaled its intention to reduce transatlantic commitment, to reduce its forces in Europe, and at least State Secretary of US announced that probably after the crisis in Iran is over, US will start consultations with European partners regarding its participation in NATO, its military presence in Europe. So I think, first of all, it is very interesting to know for us from Estonian point of view and from your perspective, as you are one of the major beneficiaries of NATO cooperation, I think at this moment, as far as very big focus is now put on Estonia's defense, Estonia's security, and especially NATO is committed to defend in this situation of such a strong threat, Estonia, the partner country. And I would like you say, what is the role of US? How big is US presence and commitment within this NATO operation or NATO defense umbrella, which is overstretched over Estonia for the moment? And not only Estonia, maybe wider on the Baltic states for today. We start from this assessment, whether how important US presence in Estonia and US support to Estonians and commitment to Estonia's security and defense is important. To which extent?
Raha, thank you so much for having us with you, and it's always glad to exchange ideas with our Georgian counterparts, and I know how important possible NATO accession or approximation has also been for Georgia, and Estonia has always been trying to be at least helpful also for Georgia to achieve greater integration and approximation with NATO. But to come to your very concrete question about NATO and US presence and importance in our area, then for quite obvious technical, political reasons, everybody understands that US is in the very center and core of NATO. But anything that is happening in this part of the world is also looked from the Estonian point of view from the lens of regional cooperation. And if you are worried about the state of NATO and US commitment to NATO, then many things changed in Estonia when Finland and Sweden also a couple of years ago joined NATO. This means a totally different regional policy situation, and we all think, and also, by the way, in the north of NATO, in the north of the European Union, we are extremely like-minded. So we are worried. We want to focus a bit more closely on exchanging our ideas and approaches with the US, but things are not as bad as some politicians might suggest. Actually, also, the Finnish Foreign Minister Valtonen was in Washington over the weekend, had her meetings with Secretary Rubio, and Valtonen's comments was, NATO is stronger than ever. Now, it can be interpreted in many ways, but of course, we all understand that we are working very closely and upgrading and building up our capacities here in the north of Europe, so that US can be assured of our capabilities, and we look into the future with some worries, but not too much of concern, because I think we are not in a position where we can kind of discuss the withdrawal of US, for example, from the north of Europe, or from Europe in general. Taavi, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Eke, and also thank you for having me as well here on this panel. I very much agree what Eke just said. If we look back on, let's say, on the last, the few 5 years or so, the many things have happened on the larger European security scale, and also in our own Nordic Baltic region. On the negative sides, obviously, the Russian aggression, in Ukraine, which also, as you know, has much longer history or the background. It's not only very recent development, but on the other side, as a response to this, actually, number of positive developments on our side, on the Nordic and the Baltic side, and particularly the accession of Finland and Sweden to NATO, which really, changed the regional security perspective. If you look on the map of Europe today, you see that actually, it's almost like 90% now surrounded by the NATO member states. I mean, obviously, Russia has also access to the Baltic Sea, but we have both, north, west, south, the NATO members, which also both strategically, but also the militarily, actually gives so much more, the added value for our regional security as well. The depth in the strategic terms, but also in terms of the capabilities, because both countries, Finland, Sweden, also bring a lot of stuff, to NATO as well. Then, secondly, when you asked about the US recent, the comments or the various signals by the president and the others, of course, this talk of the US, I don't know, the reducing commitment or the refocusing is not a new story as well. It started long ago already, actually, with Obama. It was very much present during the Trump first administration. Well, number of things, of course, has happened, but US is still very committed and present in Europe, I have to say. And even if we analyze with the cool heads, now the recent developments after the Trump statements regarding the Hormuz and the Iran case, I mean, there has been obviously not so helpful, the negative or the unhelpful rhetoric coming out, which has, in my personal view, not helped for the sort of also the political deterrence of the NATO, if you wish. If one of the major allies questions, sort of, saying that, NATO is the paper tiger or whatever, but actually at the same time, we know that US is the backbone and we know that US forces are not, the paper tiger. So that's for sure. But deterrence as such, the concept, of course, works on the multiple levels. The military, the force is obviously big factor for the deterrence, but there is also this political, or if you wish, even psychological factor that where the unity of the allies plays an important role, and therefore it has not been maybe very helpful recently. When we look on things on the practical side, I would say so far nothing has changed. NATO is having its, the structure. It's also, the military, the organization, US troops, there. But you might be right saying that US is on the course of, the reducing its, the numbers or the presence in Europe. To what extent, how exactly that will be organized, we don't know yet. But I don't question that US will leave, the NATO, or US will leave Europe. So I don't see that happening.
Well, thank you so much. Very interesting. And let's immediately go to the very close to this question. How credible is this US withdrawal scenarios? How you just started explaining this. I think your view are quite optimistic regarding this. You don't believe fully, as I understood from your they just said that most probably this is not a very dangerous situation in this regard. But still, how credible and is credible this scenario of withdrawal, and what kind of scenarios could be realized? Would it be full withdrawal, for example, of US, or partial withdrawal, or reducing commitment, etc.? There are many other things as well. For example, the president has no legal right to withdraw from NATO, from the Transatlantic Alliance or Washington Treaty. There is need to the withdrawal to be approved by or 2/3 of Senate, or majority in Congress and majority in Senate, both. Right. So let's just briefly describe. Do you believe that US still can withdraw or significantly reduce its commitment? Because it's not only about withdrawal, but about certainty that in case of emergency of need, US will be immediately involved in defending Estonia. How you see this situation?
Well, if I could start maybe 3 observations. First, of course, we know already from the first Trump presidency, his sort of dislike of, the international organizations. I think he's not, the great fan of, the UN or, the other
multilateral formats.
Yeah, multilateral formats and bodies. So, this we know. He, I think, has also, if we look at his kind of the pattern of his, the actions and the political rhetoric, his tactic, deal making, if you wish, I think he always likes to put the kind of the lot of the pressure, threats to get, the things done or the moving. So we have seen this also within the NATO. First it was about, the defense expenditure, that, the all allies should reach, this long-standing commitment, going back to, the Wales summit some, I don't know, 12 years ago already by now, that all NATO allies should reach, 2% of the defense expenditure. What now, decade later, all allies finally have, achieved. That's already the case. From the last Hague summit, of course, we have a new, commitment. And again, a lot of the pressure, similar rhetoric that, the US commitment will be reduced. We will not defend, who is not spending, that kind of talk. So now we have a commitment by all NATO allies that within the next decade, the allies should increase its defense expenditure in a kind of the two groups, but in together even up to the 5%. The Estonia, some other NATO allies within NATO are pushing that this expenditure should increase even faster, more rapidly. We shall not wait till 10 years because of the security situation. But some allies, I don't know, like Spain or others, even still dispute how strong is this commitment and how it should be done. So this is this is number one. Secondly, how serious this threat to leave it? As I said, I personally don't believe that things come even close to that. My reading of the picture or the analysis is that it's another example of this kind of the Trump rhetoric to put the pressure on the allies. If we look deeper on the current crisis, the situation, it all started with the Iran case and this U.S.-Israeli operations there, and when also the U.S. wanted some NATO to use some of the military bases hosted by some other NATO allies, and they didn't get this the access or the right to use these bases. First, it started with this Diego Garcia base, on the UK soil. Americans have always treated this like its own base, but actually, legally it's not. And some other refusals by other European allies. So that's maybe the one issue. And another thing is also that what actually the Europeans could provide or do in the Hormuz. Right now, I think at this stage probably not much, but at later stage when things have calmed down, there is a bit kind of the more firm peace arrangements. I think still Europeans could offer, and they also seem to be ready to offer certain capabilities. So to conclude that second point, I think we have to look on the current issues crisis really within the Iranian context and not in the wider NATO context. NATO has had, similar difficult transatlantic disputes crisis earlier. We may go back to 56 Suez, when UK, France, actually then they were on the Israeli side and the US on the other side with Egypt. So we solved the Iraq 2003. Number of times we have the overcome, but it really didn't affect the NATO structures, policies, US presence in NATO as such. And finally, legally, I think actually it's still, if you follow also closely debate in the US, it's still debatable. I mean, some constitutional experts, politicians say that actually it's a constitutional right, prerogative of the president to withdraw the country from some international organizations, also from the ratified agreements, and no law could overrule sort of the constitutional right. But you are right that this law, which was passed a few years ago, requires 2/3 of the Senate to approve, and now US midterm elections coming later this autumn, so very difficult to see that happening. But personally, as I said, I don't think that we even come close to actual discussion of this debate. But Eke, maybe you would like to pick up some more points.
I would also like to highlight that the context of the recent discussions on US possible withdrawal from Europe is of course the war in Iran and the annoyance of of the very energetic president of US with countries like Spain, UK, possibly Italy. It means that the much more likely outcome of this discussion is possibly the relocation of NATO or US troops in Europe. And actually, it can be even beneficial for NATO's eastern flank because the most logical place to relocate the US troops in Europe would be countries like Romania, Poland, also possibly Estonia. So, and of course, I would like to remind everybody that But US boots are here on the ground today as we speak. They're here in Poland, they're in Estonia. So it's a very tightly knit and integrated defense cooperation, and I really cannot see it being dismantled, because if US wants to project power in the world, in all the regions, in Asia, Middle East, then of course, I mean, the resources and the assets in Europe are of vital interest to them. So it is actually a bit hysterical to see, or to claim that US is withdrawing from Europe.
And maybe just one more argument, if I may. I think Eke is very right. So that is, the one, the possible scenario of, just the relocation, recalibrating, the US presence in Europe, just going, from some bases to another locations, but which also in itself is not an easy operation, because if you think of, the US military base, I mean, a larger, it's actually a huge infrastructure. It's not only kind of the military equipment, but you have like, the small cities around this, going to, I don't know, the schools and, the housing and, the everything. It takes, quite an effort and also a little bit of time, to build infrastructure like that. But another scenario, I think, issue what this Iran war has, I think, highlighted, and maybe also what allies could discuss within NATO or also on a bilateral basis, is actually this issue of the usage of the military bases. Because if you are member of the, the security military alliance, and your big ally actually cannot trust or be sure whether, he can use, the bases, airfields, whatever, on the allied territories, that of course is raising, some issues, the value of these bases, in the eyes of, this big ally, and maybe, but just another, theoretical possibility that we could see some kind of the more developed agreements that, how these bases still could be used, because if that will not be possible, then that will also change completely, the war game and the picture. But I also I can't actually imagine that, the US withdrawing its force from Europe, because as Eke mentioned, it's also so important, not only for protecting security in Europe, but also actually projecting US power, particularly in the Middle East. So it's
yeah, exactly. I want to intervene here. Exactly. I can remind the statement by Secretary Rubio, saying that exactly the US needs its basis and NATO agreement behind this basis, actually, in order not only to defend Europe, but in order also to project the US influence and US capabilities, to project them in the wider region, and not only wider region, but beyond. Also, we see that from this Iranian war, we see that exactly the European bases were necessary. The US needed actually them in order to conduct operations from United States, but using as an intermediate place the European bases, and around this we saw the conflict. But let's go to the next. Thank you very much. We understood actually clearly the volatility of situation still, but what about alternatives? Let's go to the worst scenario, that US decided to reduce its commitment, to make it more bluer, whether US is able and willing to defend Baltic states from the aggression. And let's go to the scenario which suggests other actions, necessary actions in order to defend Estonia or to defend Baltic states with other possibilities, excluding NATO in this regards, NATO framework. And here, to my mind, is coming some type of alliances which Baltic states already have. For example, this so-called Joint Expeditionary Force, which is led by UK and established not only by Baltic but also Nordic states involved, right? So this also Nordic-Baltic cooperation, which is political cooperation first of all, but as I know, there is also security and military dimension of cooperation also inside. But this expeditionary force, what is the prospects for evolvement or for evolution of this kind of cooperation into a strong alliance, which could in the future, at least for certain local conflicts and in the situation of some not big scale conflicts in the Baltic, can somehow intervene and enforce the defense or security of these countries.
Yeah, thank you. Well, regarding this, the JEF or Joint Expeditionary Force, so this, the concept cooperation has been there for, already for a decade or so. Yeah, you are right. It's, includes countries here around, the Baltic Sea, but also, the UK, which is the leading nation. And I think actually it has been very, very helpful, both, as a political and also the military cooperation format. But this definitely, at least from the, the Estonian perspective, is not an alternative or the replacement of the cooperation within the NATO alliance. So the other regional formats, our very close, good cooperation here with the Baltic neighbors, we really work together on many, many fields, or in enlarged Nordic-Baltic cooperation format. So this is like only kind of the added value or the layer within the NATO. And the JEF is not only kind of the theoretical concept on a paper, but we have seen actually JEF already in action, particularly on the Baltic Sea, because also within the JEF framework, some missions or joint operations have been launched and are still conducted. For example, patrolling here on the Baltic Sea. Now NATO, of course, took over this. What is this called? This vahimees.
Yeah, you don't know the English word for it. Right.
There is currently one, the NATO naval operation on the Baltic Sea to, keep an eye on all of this kind of increase the awareness and, the monitoring. But JEF, within the JEF, the countries, deployed some, the earlier action. So it was, a bit kind of the faster, the movement than, within NATO, but it definitely doesn't, replace in our eyes, the NATO as such. And also looking with the kind of the longer term perspective, if that scenario will, materialize that, US will stay in NATO, in Europe, but with, the reduced number of forces or the capabilities, then, that kind of, internal intra-EU mechanisms within Europe, within alliance, I think actually become, also more important. And it also helps, from the practical interoperability and, communication and from all that perspective as well. So it has been useful. It has been used, but it will not replace NATO. It's just kind of the added value from our perspective.
Well, if one about the bigger kind of geopolitical picture, then of course we all remember the talks about Europe's strategic independence and European army, and this has always been a no-no for Estonia, because we feel strongly that Europe should contribute more to NATO. We should enhance our European cooperation within NATO, but we shouldn't build a parallel structure to NATO. So this is what Estonia and also the other Nordic Baltic countries are believing in, and this is what we are achieving. And when Davi here mentioned the naval operations, for example, in the Baltic Sea, then we remember the attacks on the underwater infrastructure in the Baltics. We see the violations of our airspace by Russian fighters and bombers. So the integrated, multi-layer, multinational cooperation in the Baltic and Nordic is very important to Estonia. And when we 5 minutes ago discussed the importance of US in the area, then actually I would like to remind that the Baltics and of course the Nordics and especially Finland, we do have actually a formidable army and military capability. So even though we all understand the importance.
I'm sorry, Eke, that's very interesting question, and I want to talk about it separately.
All right, good.
So let's us to go
but exactly, Jeff,
now
Jeff
to turn to another question, and then we will come back, and I will ask you to explain. Actually, I want to ask question about the resilience and the possibilities that in Baltic states and its nearby partners exist in order to respond to the challenges. So we will turn to this. But at this moment, I want to continue asking about the alternative ways in order to ensure or secure the survivability, to say, of Baltic states in case of US withdrawal from NATO, or at least reduction of its commitment. And here to my mind comes now this attempts of European Union to create a stronger common defense. I mean, the common defense is enshrined in possibility of creating common defense, or even commitment to create common defense, to develop common defense in EU is enshrined in EU's treaties, the founding treaties, Article 42, I remember this, the Common Defense Clause. And so there is, if there is will from side of EU member states, then they can and are able to develop something not exactly alternative to NATO, because US is very important, we understand, but at least some autonomous defense capabilities that in certain cases of the EU can serve as an umbrella, a security umbrella for any EU member states. And in this regards, what is your opinion about the work which now inside of EU, especially the initiatives of the European Commission and the SAFE and the structural cooperation under PESCO and other things, how intensively they are now realized as an EU agenda, defense agenda? And also the commitments in terms of money that EU member states committed already quite big, up to 1 trillion euro, as I know, to spend in future years on defense. What is your opinion? Would it be possible for EU really, if not create common army, but create at least a joint, strong coordination in order, in case of any important challenges and imminent threats, and Baltic states are most vulnerable, actually, states in this regards, that EU could be able to defend itself without United States?
If I may start, then probably with very personal observation that I remember days when I, as a young diplomat, worked at Estonian EU mission in late 90s and in early 2000s, before our accession to the EU in 2004. It was very, very rare and seldom you could see people in the military uniforms in the EU institutions buildings, either in the council building, in the commission, elsewhere. That was not the case, because at that time, some 20, 25 years ago, EU was not simply dealing with these matters as all. Then yes, also the treaties have also evolved and developed, and indeed there are these the passages or the clauses in the treaties, even of the kind of the mutual assistance vis-a-vis each other within the EU, and which, by the way, has been also already used once. If you remember, when there was in France this terrorist attacks, I think in this theater, there, and then interestingly enough, French government asked for the assistance by the other the allies countries, not within the NATO like the US did after 9/11, but actually France asked for the assistance by the partners within EU using that.
Under the Lisbon Treaty.
On the Lisbon Treaty, so that the other member states.
Yes, exactly. That was a so-called solidarity clause.
Solidarity clause, exactly.
Which is together with common defense clause. It is
yeah. But I'm just describing for our listeners
to defend or to act in cases of emergency or in cases of aggression or any other things. Yes, it was actually activated, the common.
Yeah, exactly. So just for
exactly common defense, but the solidarity clause. So
yeah, exactly.
Yes,
so that for our listeners, that within the NATO, this Article 5 has been used once to assist actually US after 9/11 terrorist attacks, and this EU solidarity clause, mutual assistance, has been also so far used once, initiated by France, so that the other EU member states, including Estonia, stepped in to provide more, capabilities, troops also outside of the EU in Africa, particularly, which helped, the France to release some of its, troops capabilities to, for the fight against, the terror, and also, more intelligence sharing and, many things started within the EU after that. So, but to come back to my point is that within last, the decade or two, EU actually has made quite a big steps, or the relatively big steps in this, the defense domain. So we have, the structures, formats ready for that, also adapted, these structures. But how I see on the larger picture, things going forward is that EU is a very helpful mechanism and a tool to coordinate, and the joint forces, within the EU member states to develop further, these capabilities. But again, it's not kind of the separate security structure or the arrangement in parallel to the EU. For example, to develop some, the technical capabilities. I don't know, they could be from some, I don't know, satellites to...
In parallel of NATO, you wanted to say, I think.
Well, in a sense, yes, that within the EU, the formats, of course, in a close dialogue with NATO, keeping in mind all the NATO standards, the requirements, but so that the NATO and the EU member states, like, let's say, Estonia and Latvia or Netherlands or others, are not just, unilaterally alone developing some capabilities, but EU could help here, to bring EU, NATO member states together into some joint, the projects, developments. What is also a very big step forward is that also we can actually use some funds from the EU budget for these, the research and development programs, which was not the case, a decade ago, or this, the early days I referred to, so that the defense spending was kind of no-go area for the EU. But days and things have changed, and of course now even with the assistance to the Ukraine and European the defense fund and other which are outside EU budget instruments, it's also a good example how things have moved. But again, to conclude my long intervention, I don't see EU developing kind of the parallel force structure or capabilities, but actually it could serve as a very useful tool to help to coordinate and jointly develop the European capabilities, which could be used within NATO, within JEF, on the individual basis, bilateral, regional, whatever is the proper context.
I mean, if I may add here, then the solidarity force at one point was created in a totally different world with totally different security challenges, maybe keeping in mind terrorism or smaller conflicts. Now we're living in a totally different world, and EU can be very instrumental in taking forward joint European, let's say, infrastructure projects, because to move troops and equipment, Europe has to be well connected logistically. And this is where Europe and the European Union can be of great kind of help or complementary nature to NATO. But the overall thinking still is that NATO should bear the major burden of taking care of big security challenges. NATO should be Europeanized. Europe should upgrade its commitment, upgrade its possibilities, but parallel infrastructure or parallel political structures or coordination structures to NATO should be at all costs avoided, because this would create more chaos than bring benefits.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. That's a really interesting discussion, and I see that many things that you say, of course, are not just suggestions or supposed ideas, but they come from yourself. Living in Estonia and being involved in actually wider security community of your country, that you understand quite well the practical difficulties and practical challenges that the countries EU can face if it stands alone. But now I want to ask regarding the Estonia's preparedness as a community, as a society. So how resilient the Estonia, or maybe you also can talk about wider Baltic context, Baltic states, how resilient they are towards the possible real threats and possible challenges coming from the neighboring countries. And you know very well that the major problem as the neighboring country is Russia, of course. And I have heard that it's written widely that Russia may be trying to provoke some separatist movements in Estonia, in particular in Narva region, or any other regions of your neighboring countries. So there are many considerations about this, what the countries can do in this situation, for example, Estonia. But the question is not only about Russia's direct involvement, but there are hybrid also possibilities, and hybrid war instruments that Russia uses in order to destabilize your countries, Baltic states, somehow to shake the ground on which your stability is built on. I would like to ask you about this, how the government, how the society prepares itself in Estonia. There are many things I have heard that, not heard just, but read as well, that you increase your reserves and there are many voluntary also young people going to prepare themselves as a future soldiers. I mean, in case of necessity to immediately participate in the defense of the country. And there is also political stability, which is necessary for country to withstand. Also, many other things which create the resilience of the society as such. So allow me to ask you, and then you started this talking about this earlier, so now I'm returning you the word. Please explain how you see the resilience infrastructure of Estonia at this moment.
Kaha, history has taught Estonia many bitter lessons, and the same is true for Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, and also Poland. Countries living next to imperialist Russia have always been vigilant. So remember, before the full-scale invasion of Russia to Ukraine in 22, prior to that, Estonia was always warning our allies in EU and in NATO. We should be prepared, we shouldn't trust Russia, and we were told that we are a bit too Russophobic and we should take it easy and Russia is changing. So we have always been vigilant. We have always had a relatively well-structured defense thinking and army. We have had always a conscript army, by the way. So have had the Finns. So we have a well-prepared reserve army. We have our own, let's say, professional army, of course, but we have always, for many years already, spent the required 2% of GDP on defense. And now all of us practically, I mean, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, and also almost also the same level with Finland, we are close to the 5% GDP spending for defense. So even though, as I mentioned, US is seen as the very core and center of NATO, then I would still claim that we do have formidable deterrents, and we are able to take care of our initial defense necessities if these necessities might materialize at one point. And yeah, Davi, you want to comment here?
Yeah, maybe just a couple of more remarks that this obviously is not a new phenomena for us, the hybrid, or for example, the cybrid threats that, something we experience only now, after, the Russia's full-scale aggression in Ukraine. But actually, I'd like to recall it was almost, 20 years ago, more precisely 19 years ago, in April 2007, when we had in Estonia one quite big case, I think also well reported, when government decided to remove what we call this kind of the monument of the bronze, the soldier, maybe you remember, Kaha, from the city center of Tallinn, which was installed by the Soviets, after the Second World War, and then which actually has become like became like a symbol of the Soviet occupation in Estonia, and the Estonian government wanted to remove and place it where it actually belongs more properly to the military, the cemetery. And we had the huge kind of the riots, and but also quite a big, massive cyber attack, organized against the Estonia. What we actually managed to protect quite well, but it caused some the turbulence. But this was a kind of the major I don't like this term, but wake-up call, but okay, let's use it once here that, for the Europe, that what kind of things or the reaction, could come from outside trying to destabilize, the society, to have a blackout of some, critical infrastructure services, I don't know, first aid or banking or whatever, in a modern information technology society. So if you don't have an internet or the connections to services, then actually quite a big chaos could happen. But as in a number of other cases with the Russian originated initiatives, it didn't serve the purpose. Actually, vice versa. Also the European countries, NATO as well, EU as well, started to pay much more attention on the cyber, the resilience. And we have this NATO cooperative cyber center of excellence in Tallinn, which is doing a good work on that work. Then secondly, I'd like to point out, and what you also mentioned, what is very, very important is actually also kind of the political stability in the country. And actually, I'm, personally, as a citizen of Estonia, quite happy and proud to see that we, no longer have a kind of, the ethnicity or, the language-based parties in Estonia. What we used to have maybe, in 90s, maybe even in early 2000s still yet, but these days are long, gone. And if you look on our, the political debate landscapes, we have, the centrist forces, leftists, conservatives, some, the extremists, here, left and right, maybe, well, some maybe are more closer, let's say, to kind of, the Russian rhetoric or the views, but still it's not kind of the, the ethnicity or the language-based things which could kind of to provoke, some political instability in the country. And society itself as well have I think, increased the level of the preparedness, and not only because of, the kind of the military threat or the factors, but for other reasons as well. I think it's quite common these days in Estonia, at least in my household, maybe you as well. We have certain reserves of the, the food, water. If something happens, then at least first few days, I don't know, I've thought about maybe 5-6 days or so, but I should be, or our family should be able.
So you are so wise on individual level. It's like that you can immediately in the case of the aggression, you can immediately convert into the forest brothers.
Well, even in your own, the household,
having your reserves together and
or in the
some weapons and other things.
But I think also the government has done here a lot of communication vis-a-vis the population, and I don't think that it's very kind of the seldom or individual example. I think it's quite the wide base kind of the reaction in a society. And the latest example was it a year ago, year and a half, was when Estonia went from the Russian electricity grid to the European electricity grid. And then again, I mean, it was, there were some risks, what could be the reaction, because this was another example how to cut off yourself from the old Soviet or the Russian systems, integrate technically to Europe. And, nobody knew what sort of reaction could be or what could happen. And again, it, made sense to have, to be ready for that. This is just, the one example, but still, I think there are a number of things which could be improved. I see, I'm no longer in a government, could also, speak maybe more, critically on that. I still see a number of things where, which could be improved, where the government is paying attention, making efforts, like all this, the sirens or the messaging systems. We have had recently some, this drone incidents that, when Ukraine, they launched long-range drones from its territory to target some of, the Russian ports, the oil infrastructure here in the neighborhood to our and Finnish, the borders. then few of the drones, somehow, happen to land or come to our or Finnish, the territory. And then, the Estonian government or the military structures send kind of the SMSs or the messages that, be aware of, and if you see something, what to do, and, report that they try to improve. So I think it's a Ukrainian experience which tells us that in the
yes, here I think it is important that we go to another question.
Good.
I see already you started talking about Ukraine, and I had in mind already to ask you what Ukraine. What Ukraine's war with Russia means for you. So how it influences Baltic states, Estonia, your internal mobilization, your attention. You are one of the per capita, I think, you are the most important donor for Ukraine. If you count per capita, your assistance is very strong, and your political assistance is even stronger and strongest, I think, in the world. So this means that Ukraine is something very important. What happens now in Ukraine for you, and from other side also what the Ukraine case teaches you. So had you drawn any lessons from this situation and reconsidered your approaches towards your own security also? In terms, for example, the necessity of collective efforts, of being more close with your neighbors, and importance of being solidary with each other. I think that you really doesn't lack this kind of thinking, but still, I want you explain better what Ukraine war means for you in this sense, how it changed your attitudes and approaches.
Well, Kaha, I think Estonia actually started providing Ukraine with javelins even before the 24th of February 22. And we have always been, as you mentioned, the ones who have really contributed a lot, maybe even the most GDP-wise to Ukraine. And we have always kept a very close eye on the developments. I mean, in the society and also in the military and on the front line. I think we have quickly redefined our defense posture. I think we pay a lot of attention now to the defense of the border area. We pay a lot of attention to drones. We are also doing many things as to informing the public. So, and of course, I mean, we are the ones also in Europe keeping the focus of Europe on Ukraine, because Estonia is also on the forefront of explaining to the European Union again and again and again about the necessity to use the frozen Russian assets in Europe, about the necessity to bring war criminals to a tribunal. So there are some European countries, without naming them, who are more kind of relaxed about the situation in Ukraine. They have their own social problems or whatever problems, but we are keeping the focus of Europe also on Ukraine. So in a way, we have also accepted, I think, per capita, almost the largest number of refugees of Ukrainians on Estonian soil. So we very much understand that the defense of Ukraine is the defense of Estonia and the defense of Europe as a whole. David?
Yeah, exactly. To start where Eke finished, that this is kind of the mainstream thinking in Estonian political analysis. I think not only by the government, but in the wider society, that Ukraine is not defending only itself, but actually kind of the wider European security.
Civilization.
Yeah, because I mean, Putin has been, very clear and blunt with his goals, and it's not only about the Ukraine or the Ukrainian territory, but it's about kind of the new European security architecture. And so he wants to demolish and basically push back the Europe to the earlier, or the NATO to the earlier boundaries before NATO enlarged to the Poland, Baltic states, the other Central European countries, so that we see there is much more at stake. It's not only about the fate of the Ukraine, but was it Brzezinski who already a long time ago wrote that actually where Ukraine belongs determines the European kind of the security architecture. And of course, keeping that in mind, I think our response has been from the early days, the very strong, helped by all means, military, humanitarianly, etc. Ukraine, you are right that per capita, I think we are one of the biggest, the donors, providers. Estonian government even is trying to seek commitment by other EU, the allies or the EU partners, that is it 0.25% of GDP, to commit for the Ukrainian, the assistance. This is something what we do or close to this. And this, of course, would help to boost assistance towards the Ukraine. But probably even kind of the more important role Estonia has played, because though this per capita figure is big, in real terms, it's still the small drop in an ocean, is of course is to raise awareness and to put a pressure on European the partners to be aware of. So what actually we are talking here about, and therefore really some Estonian initiatives within the EU, like this 1 million round of this ammunitions, and the tribunal of the war crimes. Now another thing that actually to ban also all Russian combatants who have participated in the war, that they are not allowed to travel later to the EU, etc. So that within the wider European context, I think these initiatives maybe have they helped more. And last but not least, I'd like to conclude is that also pushing to move on with the EU enlargement as well towards the Ukraine, Moldova, other candidate countries. And really sorry to see that Georgia by its own or the government decision is out of that process right now, and let's see that after recent elections in Hungary this weekend, maybe we will also get the ball, the rolling on that front as well. So I've been myself working quite closely with the Ukrainian, but also the Moldovan governments, and I really applaud for their internal reforms and steps taken to be more ready for the accession, and it has been this kind of political obstacle so far, mainly by Hungary, but maybe not only, and hopefully now soon, later this spring, we get actual EU accession talks moving forward.
Well, thank you so much. And I was thinking whether it was relevant or not to ask you about your feelings regarding the Hungarian elections that just happened, but it's so hot issue and so important for Georgian society as well, because we debate a lot that it is possible or not to change the authoritarian regime when it has already established and stabilized itself, like it happened in Hungary. But I'm asking you I would like to ask you shortly regarding your views on Hungary, especially knowing that if there is any relative to Hungarian people in Europe that are Estonians and probably Finnish also, somehow, of course, very very distanced relatives, but still there are. It's not main important issue, of course, but in order to know that I think you could understand Estonian culture maybe still better than other European countries. I don't know exactly, but you went through different ways and different development of the past and influences. But still, I think there is something that you could understand better. And I would ask you, what is the phenomenon? How the Hungarian people still overcome this kind of already established established difficulties and regime and some adaptation to the existing corrupted situation, corrupted regime, etc., and still shown this kind of courage in order to change the regime. And what are the implications for NATO, for EU, for European unity of this, what happened in Hungary yesterday?
Well, if I may start, then you mentioned Hungarians being distant relatives for Estonians, right? So actually, we are in the same language group, but Finns are close relatives, and the Hungarians are really very distant relatives. And of course, we were all still keeping an eye on the elections last Sunday. And I was actually surprised to see how big an issue the elections in a small Hungary are all over the world. I mean, BBC, CNN, or of course, Estonian news. I mean, it was the big thing. It was even bigger than the developments in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf, for example. So we all sensed that for the future of Europe, also, by the way, for the future of Ukraine and Ukraine's war against Russia, these elections were very important, and therefore we paid attention, and we were very glad to see that European forces actually prevailed, and we understand that it will be much easier for Europe and also for NATO to speak with one voice against Russia, and when you asked about how come this already well-established regime in Hungary would collapse, then actually it is in the very logic and DNA of the corrupt, long-standing regimes that they will at one point weaken. They will weaken a lot economically, and also the political kind of reliability or of these politicians will be eroded. I mean, well, the Soviet Union stood for a long time, but it still did collapse because of the corrupt political system and because of the corrupt economy. So it doesn't come as a surprise, and I'm glad that it happened last Sunday. Taavi?
Yeah, very briefly, because I think time is running quickly, but I think the Hungarian parliamentary elections over the weekend probably also could encourage, democratic forces in Georgia as well, that it is possible by the democratic means to overthrow autocratic, long-standing, also the corrupt political system, and yeah, probably because of the number of factors, society came close to this. I don't know, can I call it a boiling? The temperature or the moment that in the light of all the kind of the economic hardships, energy prices, many things, some the late or the recent developments which really population at large was not happy to see, like coming so close, like a vassal of the Russia, and etc. Led to this very big desire by population to change the government, seating government, and of course it will be, I think, quite difficult and uphill struggle for the new Tisha government to conduct and carry through all these necessary reforms, either in front of the rule of law system, because if you look at the, I don't know, judiciary, courts, prosecution, all that system, I mean, it's still, the guise of the old regime there in place. We know from the Polish example how difficult it might be to have this, the change to happen. I mean, in all these structures, government has had huge influence on the outgoing party, even in educational systems, the universities, economic structure, the companies. I think there is still a lot to do. So it will be a difficult road ahead. Many unpopular decisions probably we'll see in coming months and years, kind of the diminishing domestic, the support for the incoming government, because these painful reforms are never, the popular, even if they want to, they diminish their energy dependence from Russia, what I think the new Hungarian government wants to do, although still keeping some, the oil, gas flowing coming in from, the eastern side, but also finding, alternatives to this. But even the measures like that, in Hungary, I understand today, for example, the price of the petrol in the pump station is, the limited. There is actually different prices for the Hungarian number plate cars and the foreign cars, so that if you even abolish that kind of the populist or kind of the market interventional, the measures, I mean, in my logic, it cannot be a very popular thing among the ordinary citizens if you have to pay for some, things more, but they're absolutely necessary, to come back or closer to the market economy and also economic energy interdependence. We know ourselves that it comes at sort of cost, but at the end of the day, it is much, much better, to be, part of this, the true European democratic family than to be kind of the blackmailed by some of these heavy interdependencies.
Thank you so much for your views regarding this topic as well, because really to understand your views about the European integration, how important it is, and the European unity from the point of view of Hungarian elections as well. This was about unity. The people chooses to be united in Europe and with European states than to follow the elites who are the quite corrupted elites of Hungary, who are thinking to be as much isolated as possible in order to be independent in their decisions. And I think that this is very relevant for all Eastern European countries, maybe save Estonia, because Estonia I see as an example. And I was thinking a lot when watching and listening about Hungary and other Eastern European states, what happens there, and what kind in Slovakia, for example, in Czechia, or any other states of Eastern Europe, what kind of challenges emerge there related to the future of liberal democracy in these countries, to the future of Europeanness of these countries, and to the European idea support, etc. I was always thinking that most probably Estonia is the only country in this region where these issues would never be questioned. That liberal democracy, that good governance, and the sense of solidarity with others around, etc. So you are really exemplary in this issues.
I think
so maybe you don't agree, but
I think we should never.
My feelings. These are my feelings about it. Probably internally, more. But the question is not about this. I think that what I would like to ask you, we should go to the end of our very, very interesting, thanks to you, very interesting conversation. And I'd like finally to ask you, maybe you mentioned your opinion, final opinion about the strongest and weakest sides of Estonian or Baltic in general security. I would say not even architecture, but security philosophy that you have, or approaches that you have to defend your countries. What are the weakest points where you really have some worries in case of emergency, in case of some threats, and what are really strong and secured sides of your security build up in your country?
Right. I think for once we live in a like-minded neighborhood. All of our neighbors are thinking more or less in the same way. I think we have excellent regional cooperation. I think we have accumulated quite solid defense capabilities. So in that sense, we are good. What is, for example, a weakness for Estonia, if we think about the full-scale conflict, and of course we're so small, we do not have the strategic depth that, for example, Ukraine has. So in any case of fully blown war, we will have many problems and troubles. But then, of course, yeah, I think we are relatively logical and also calm in our thinking. We do the planning. We understand and try to understand the threats and mobilize the resources according to the need.
I would say you are rational.
I
right?
think probably I would claim we are, and also I think in Estonia, I think the public in general has the same perception of threat and the same perception of how to address the threat. So therefore, we do not have big political arguments or quarrels on what needs to be done. We more or less understand it the same way, and we take necessary steps.
Yeah, I would also summarize in a very short way that the most critical aspect for our security, it will remain for a foreseeable future, is our geographical location and our eastern neighbor, Russia, with its own kind of the imperial doctrine and undemocratic authoritarian regime. And on the positive plus side, yes, that we are members of all possible alliances, starting from EU, which actually also plays an important role in kind of the broader security concept, economically, energy-wise, etc., and of the NATO, and also that internally we have this cohesion within the country, that there is a very broad, both political but also the popular support for the memberships in these organizations, and allocating adequate resources and take necessary the steps to be ready, so that the hope for the best, but to be ready for the worst, like the saying goes. So that and I still think that to conclude with optimistic note that we still see the bright future ahead, despite all the difficulties, but we still remain optimistic here.
Yeah, and I would say God help you and help us in this. Thank you so much. I was enjoying talking to you, and I wish you all the best to your country and to your job, to your organizations where work, and I think that I would be very happy to continue with you somehow dialogue. Of course, not every second day we can talk together like this, but I would be very happy if you agree in the future someday to join us when the situation changes and there are some important I hope there will be breakthrough also on Ukrainian front, and this will change situation a lot. Also, if there is something new related to this overall security architecture and security approaches in Europe and involving Estonia, of course, I will be always looking to engage you in the dialogue in the
Okay, well, I don't know whether you can still hear us. We lost for a while. Okay, so Kaha, Didi Madloba, it's always been a great pleasure working with you and working with GFSS. Looking forward to seeing you in Tallinn soon and looking forward to continuing our cooperation in different formats.